Hello everyone and welcome back into another video, and in this week's Daily Race C we have seen a significant drop in safety rating for most of the drivers that were racing in here, and I even noticed that some of the players are actually avoiding this combination. But here's the actual reason why. So there was a lot of bump drafting, a lot of pushing, and of course a lot of fights just to get into that front, I would say a couple of positions before the last turn. But when I was looking at all of the options in here, I was just looking at the global leaderboards, and you can see that most of these times were set with the 4GT, and I also set my time with the 4GT because it's the fastest car in the straight line, and of course with the slipstream it does make it even better. So a couple of other cars that were, I'm gonna say, pretty decent. We have, for example, the Mazda RX Vision, we had this VGT one, and for some reason Laporte decided to go with the M6, and he actually made it work. But apart from the 4GT, there were not that many cars that you can use. So I tried most of these cars, and I was really surprised by the lack of performance from this GTR and of course this GT Supra. So these cars were undrivable, unusable, and were completely out of any kind of contention for the top positions on the leaderboards. So when we're looking at these cars that I actually tried the Suzuki. It was quite a wild ride. I wouldn't recommend it though. I was surprised by a couple of these cars. So for example, the F-Type didn't perform. The 911 was kind of an option, but not really the best car. But something that really stood out, it was this 4C. This was actually a pretty decent car, and I liked driving this car. It had some serious pace. But when I'm looking at I'm gonna say majority of these cars, they were, I'm gonna say, unusable, except for this Beetle, which was OP, which wasn't OP. But okay, RX Vision, as I said before, has some decent pace. I had some fun with the Beetle, but what really stood out for me was the 650S. I honestly thought this car had no pace. I thought it was going to be out of contention, and it was going to be one of those cars that you just don't want to drive. But I was definitely wrong. So I would really like to show you my highlights of the week and exactly what I did with, a couple of these cars, just to point out the most common problems and, well, actually a lot of bump drafting and a lot of safety ratings down. So let's begin. And I think it's finally time that we begin with the Volkswagen Beetle, one of the choices from the community, and I decided to go with this car. Even though it wasn't that great, it was actually pretty awful on the straight, and you can see how easy it is for the other 4GTs to overtake me. So the top speed of this car was around 300, but you need to be in the slipstream for a very, very long time to reach 300 kilometers an hour. So it was just about 20 kilometers per hour slower than the 4GTs. But it had pretty good acceleration though. So acceleration of that car was really good, and somehow I was able to keep my P4 after the first lap, which was, well, it was a victory just by itself. So I was back into P4, and I was in this big, I'm gonna say a big group, because we were chasing the leaders, and we were actually getting closer to the front two runners who were just about a second in front of us. But there is nothing much that I can do on the straight, which is again the only chance to overtake on this track. So I'm back down into P8 by the end of the straight, and you can see the big group up ahead, a lot of drivers just pushing it, and this is one of the reasons why the safety rating was dropping quite a lot. So P8 at this point, just trying to get myself into P7, but even in the slipstream the Ford was quicker. Like it was still quicker, unless of course the other drivers, of course, around me had damage. So damage was always slowing other people around, and other cars, of course. So I was just trying to keep it smooth, keep it clean, don't do anything to get myself a penalty or get myself any kind of damage, because that would mean it was, yeah, it's pretty much game over at that point. So penalties were something that I really wanted to avoid, and especially in the longer races like this one. Not that long, but 20 minutes of slipstream with even a half a second penalty can get you out of that slipstream zone, and it's really not something that you can get back. So here I'm pushing it. I'm trying to get myself into at least P5 just before this, I'm gonna say this very technical section, but I can see a couple of bumps, and there isn't much that you can do. I mean, everyone is fighting for their positions, and there isn't much space, especially when we're going like 3 or maybe even 4 wide in some of these turns. So the goal is usually just to keep clean, or just try to stay clean, and as I said before, don't get a penalty, as I kind of missed the apex of the turn, which isn't probably the best thing. And after all of this, I've managed to get this Beetle into P2 after this pretty heavy contact, and I don't think it was quite fair, because the driver in P1 really cut the corner and he didn't get a penalty. But you can see 18:52, so not that great finishing time. The next up was the Jaguar F-Type. I mean, I thought this car was actually going to perform, but it honestly wasn't that great. So I tried really pushing this car to the limit and just trying to see what this car can do. But 283, 284, even in the slipstream, it was reaching about 290, 295. It just wasn't enough to keep up with the guys up in the front. So I really tried. I tried to get the most out of this car, but you can see how much faster these other cars were. So the F-Type was probably one of the worst cars that I've driven here, because it just gets up to like 300 and it just stops when it reaches that point. So even in the slipstream, it's not that much. But with all of the chaos around me, I was able to get back into P2, which was quite surprising for me, because I thought I'm not going to get even a P10 out of this race. But as you can see, the times, you can see them 340, 341, so they are not the best times that we were setting in, and probably because with all of the fighting and with all of the penalties, all of the damage that other players had, it was really difficult to eventually get a good time by the end of this race. So the ending finishing time wasn't really looking that great, even though the fastest lap of this race was a 337.3, and that was with the slipstream. So I was doing a 340 and I was in P1. I was back into P1. It was actually a pretty good move, I would say, there. So I overtook all of the 4 GTs. I'm gonna say that this was a pretty lucky race for me. It was actually really, really lucky. I mean, this car cannot win here. It definitely cannot win unless something really big happens. So I would not advise you to use this car, but I actually did manage to win with it, with the finishing time, which was a little bit better than it was with the Beetle. And then it was time for the Alfa 4C. Well, one of the cars that was really surprising for me, because it actually did perform really well. So the car had decent top speed, it had decent cornering. It was, in my opinion, it's I'm gonna say 1 or 2 steps down from the 4GT. So this is a car that you can actually use against the 4GTs. It has good straight line speed, cornering. I think it's even better than the 4GT, but overall I think the 4GTs are, you know, still one step ahead than most of the other cars around. So once again, leading into the straight doesn't mean that I'm gonna end up leading by the end of the straight, but you can see that it's already reaching up to like 300 kilometers per hour, which is really good for the other cars that is, well, actually not a 4GT. So 300, and I was actually able to keep up with the guys, and I tried to go for this move, and I can say that I partially succeeded. So it wasn't my best move. I even had damage in the end, and yeah, it wasn't one of my proudest moments this week. It definitely wasn't, but a little bit of contact happened. But we went on, so P5, and not even a second behind the leader. And you can see a lot of fighting going on, a lot of pushes, a lot of those tiny bumps, and those tiny bumps really affect your safety rating in the end, because if you just touch someone and on top of that you get a penalty for it, it's not looking good for your safety rating. And if that happens 20, even 10, 20 times per race, that can really damage your safety rating. And with all of the bump drafting, with all of those little contacts that we had, your safety rating is really going down, and this is something that I really wanted to avoid. But again, you're trying to win, you're trying to push yourself, unlike these guys are trying to push themselves, which is something that isn't that great, which was kind of dirty from my point of view. And then it was me back into P2 after all of that mess, after all of that carnage, I'm gonna say. But now I really wanted to avoid any kind of contact with pretty much any cars around, and this is something that I really wanted to use, because we were in P2 and P3, a little bit of slipstream, but I decided to send it. I wanted to give him a little bit of a bump so we can, you know, eventually get more speed down the straight. but I really wanted to avoid any kind of contact. And you can see what's going on behind me. Like a group of 5 to 6 cars are just pushing it into one turn, and it never ends up well. So I just wanted to avoid that, and now I'm getting a bit of a bum draft because we are 2 seconds away from the leader. And the only way that we can catch the leader is that if we work together. So this was actually good now because the guy in P3 has a 1 second penalty, which means that even if he overtakes me, I'm going to overtake back. So at this point it was looking good. I was catching on the leader. It was 1.5. I think it was 1.4 at this point, and the leader also has a penalty, which once again is pretty good for me because I have to focus on just not making a big mistake, and I'll be once again in the contention for P1, which was again pretty good. So P3 serving his penalty is dropped into P4, and I am back into slipstream with P1. So this is looking pretty good at this point for me. And the most important part here was the slipstream. So if you lose the slipstream, you pretty much lose the whole race. If you lose the group and, for example, the top 5 cars in front of you just pull away, there is almost no way that you're going to get it back. So there is very little or almost no chance that you will catch up with them because they're working, like 5 cars working together with the slipstream and with all of that, and you're all alone. So you're losing just about 10 to 15 kilometers per hour, which is quite a lot considering it's a very, very long straight, and without the chicane, I mean, it's really impossible. Now when I think about it, it's really difficult. So here, chasing P1, and P1 all of a sudden ends up in the wall. It's very easy to lose that 4 GT in acceleration. It's very, very easy, very difficult car in those lower gears. You know, when you get up to speed, the car gets stable, but when it's not up to speed, 2nd or 3rd gear can get quite difficult. But as I said before, so if a group of, let's say, 3, maybe 5 drivers are working together, they will easily catch you, even if you're leading. If you have difficult, I mean, I'm gonna say, even if you have a really good pace after all. So you have to have at least like 2 to 3 seconds of advantage before you get into the straight. And that is almost impossible to do because there's not that many corners around here. So you have to be extremely, extremely quick to run by yourself. Otherwise, you have to work in a group like this one, which again doesn't end up that well most of the time. But the 4C is holding on. Well, I'm gonna say one of my best cars so far. And after the pit stop in lap 3, we were once again in a group. So P1 to P4 in just about a second. And I really wanted to get this move into P3 because I thought I had a little bit more pace in the first section of the track just to get a little bit closer. And I think I had, I'm gonna say, a little bit more pace than the other guys, and you can see I'm catching them. So I'm catching them by quite a lot. So it was like 3 to 4 tenths in one corner, which again leads us to this situation. So we are back in this group, as I said before, but now P4 is 1 second behind us, and if we are working as a group, there is no way that he can catch us. And we are, or actually we were working as a group, because it's lap 5, everyone is fighting for themselves, and this is kind of a normal thing to see and to do. So just trying to keep this car under control, just trying to keep the car on the road without making a mistake. And of course I need to be early on the accelerator, otherwise the 4GT might overtake. And I had these bumps, so I think Tiago was trying to get back into the slip, but I don't think this is really the way you do it. So just bumping another driver so you can get into the slipstream. So this is not something that I like to see, and I don't think it's fair or even clean. So it was something that, you know, I've seen, but not great, really not great from his side. And I'm chasing P1. I'm really, you know, I'm trying to go for a move. I'm hitting my braking point, and all of a sudden I'm getting this hit. So he just decided to send it. I mean, but it's not the usual send, because he pushed me wide out of my ideal line. And when someone pushes you out of your ideal line, it's not considered fair and clean driving, at least from my, not from my point of view. And we were once again into the slipstream. He pushes me kind of on the outside of this corner. I mean, I was in the outside of this corner, and if you're on the outside, there's not such a great chance that you will eventually make it with that perfect line and send the move on the outside of that corner. So all of this wasn't that clean. I mean, it was just fighting for positions, but not really in the best way possible. And I was back into P3. Although, considering that all of the cars around me were 4 GTs and they were fighting quite hard, considering all of the things that happened, it was, well, one of my best performances with a non-meta car. And he almost misses that corner, and I almost get into P2. It was just barely missing out on P2. So I would say 4C, one of the best cars so far, until I got to try the McLaren 650S. This car was, I'm gonna say, one of the best cars, if not the best car that I've driven, apart from the 4GT on the circuit. And I think this car, with the recent BOP change, it's now a really good car. So a lot of traction, a lot of top speed, even though acceleration isn't much in lower gears, but once you really get up to speed, this car can perform. And I'm not even gonna mention the tire wear, so the tire wear is really good now. So this car performs, and probably one of the best options that I tried so far. So Alfa 4C seems like a decent option. Volkswagen Beetle isn't that great, but it's kind of fun to drive. But I'm gonna say one of the best cars, it's really the 650S, apart from the 4GT, which is the best option by far. So, you know, this car was just designed for this track, so it was, I would say, a logical option. So 650S performing at this point, and I'm just behind P7, but we're kind of, I'm not gonna say getting closer to P1 because it was 1.1 seconds. It was, the gap was dropping, but if you lose it, if you lose the toe from the 5 guys in front of you, it's really difficult if you're running in only a group of 2 to get back. But we managed to get back into just less than a second. But having 8 cars in less than a second isn't something that I'm looking forward to, because it usually ends up in a mess, because it is a mess. So just how to fit 8 cars in less than a second. And you can see Lewis going a little bit too wide, but it wasn't that much. So it was, I would say, all fair and all clean. But now the gap going from just about less than a second to 1.1, 1.2. And then again, we have a long straight before Indianapolis. And then once again, we have 7 or 8 cars in one heavy braking point. And as I said before, this almost never ends up well. And the gap is going up, almost up to 2 seconds. And there isn't really something that you can do. So all of the other cars have to brake. You know, we all need to leave each other space. So at this point, it's still all good. But you can see all of these kind of little tweaks and all these little moments are just kind of extending the gap to the lead. So now it's already 2 seconds, and I'm just trying to stay with the group, almost missing my braking point. But Niklas misses his braking point by quite a lot. And I tried this Mazda before. That's one of the honorable mentions. This car can really perform on the circuit. It's kind of really decent one. But low speed torque, like second or maybe even third gear, are extremely difficult to handle. So you need to position the car in the right way, straighten it up, and only then accelerate. And this is kind of the only way to make this car work. And you can see how much is he sliding. And we are losing the connection to the lead. So this is how little it takes to lose the connection. And they are working in a group of maybe 4 drivers up ahead. So at this point, it's not looking good for me, because if we lose them, we just lose them, and there is nothing much that we can do. And yeah, you can see that Niklas had a pretty interesting exit there. It was like really quick, but Elias also got a 1 second penalty. But we are just about 1.5 seconds from the group. Okay, the gap is going down, because now we are all together working as a group. And you can see this car reaching 315 kilometers per hour, and we've managed to catch the leaders. And once again, look at this. But this was one of the funniest moments that I had so far. So both of our cars, I think actually Elias was the only car that was ghosted in this moment, and we can, or he can actually overtake by being ghosted. So he doesn't have to go for that move, he just needs to stay in the slipstream and overtake. I mean, the problem is that he has a 1 second penalty, so whatever he does, he's basically going to drop a couple of positions later. We had a little bit of a contact there. I don't think he realized that that was there, but all good. I've seen a lot worse things happen than this one. Getting my braking point, just trying to get the most out of this corner, because it's a really difficult one. But I'm very glad that the 650S had so much grip, like unbelievable grip, and it's you know, one of the very positive things about the 650S. But now again, P1 and P2 are pulling away, so if we don't work as a group now, it's gonna be very difficult to catch them, so almost impossible, because that's Laporte and also Nikolic, one of the fastest guys in the game. So we need to work as a team, and we did work as a team to catch them. But now Laporte has a moment. I'm hitting my braking point in here, so just it's the second sign on the right side, but I'm getting a push from behind, and this means I have damage, and we are again 1 or maybe even 2 seconds behind of the leaders, and this isn't something that I wanted. And of course we have a couple of drivers around that are just fighting for positions, which once again it's normal because we need to pit now. So usually lap 3 was the lap to pit. I'm just trying to hold it, and there was a little bit of a contact between Lewis and the Hungarian driver, so it wasn't a big one, but allowed me to kind of get a pretty decent move on the outside of that corner. So it was kind of looking okay at this point. I still thought that we're in the contention to eventually get closer to P2 and P1, but Lewis would that have a second penalty, and now we are reaching the pit entry, and look at this now. Like, Slayers misses his braking point, just causes carnage, and we are back into pits. But I also wanted to see this from a different point of view, just looking at it from my different camera. And you can see just even slightly missing your braking point, all of the other drivers behind you are going to crash, or well, most of them, because they don't know what's going on up in the front, and there is simply no time to stop. But we're back into lap 4, Lewis with a penalty, and we are slowly catching on the leader. But now the gap is 3.5 seconds, so if we don't work together, this ain't gonna work. But 3 cars, it's always better. A bigger group, it's always gonna be faster because they can push each other more. So all of these little contexts mean that we're kind of losing the safety rating, and with safety rating it wasn't really looking that great. But okay, I'm into P4 after all of the things that happened. I had damage, I was pushed wide, and well, a couple of mistakes from my end. I'm still back into P4, and I'm probably not even going to mention the pit stop or the pit entry. That was quite wild. So here into P4, and I can see a couple of other drivers, including Momo's, behind. So at this point I'm thinking, okay, just don't make a mistake, just try to bring it home. I know the other cars, or the cars in front of me, are probably out of contention, because I mean, it's really difficult to catch them if they're pushing each other, and usually a 3-second gap means that they will stay there. But now Slayers goes slightly wider and gets a half a second penalty. But by the end of the straight, the other guys from the back, as I said before, if you work as a team, if you work as a group of, let's say, 3 to 4 drivers, you can catch the other guys in front. And this is exactly what happened. And Jose had, well, one of my favorite cars now. It's the Alfa 4C, and this car was performing. It was really performing well. So I'm just behind Slayers. He decides to go on the inside of the upcoming turn, and I just decided to go on the outside. So I thought to myself, maybe this can actually work, and so it did. So I was in P3 now. Actually made a move that was quite a nice one early on the acceleration, and I thought about maybe stopping the car so he doesn't get the toe on the next straight. But I kind of missed my entry, and my acceleration was too slow, and he managed to get to the inside, and there isn't much that I could have done. He even lifted a couple of times just to make sure that I don't get into the slipstream and I don't try to overtake him back again. So very nice move, I have to say. It was very well timed, and you know, after all of those years of experience, I think this is something that you eventually develop, those kind of little things on the circuit. Even though I missed my braking point in there, I wasn't in the best situation, but yeah, in the end, I think the 650S is a pretty good car and something that can actually perform, even though the safety rating issues, I think it's going to be solved next week when we get another combination of dailies. But it would be not right to just send it down the inside, because almost no space in there, and I'm just gonna hang on, get my P4, and after this very, I'm gonna say, exciting race, this is, I'm gonna say, a pretty solid result. And you can also check the finishing time, 18:35. So after all, and after a little bit of trouble, I can say that 650S was kind of the best car for me, and I would definitely advise you to use it. And once again, thank you very much for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, you can also click that like button, or you might even want to subscribe to the channel. And one more thing, my Black Friday offer ends on Monday, so there's still some time, and the link is going to be down in the description. So once again, guys, thank you very much for watching, and until the next time, bye.